Stepping stones to awareness, right, okay. So now this is, I'm afraid that an awful lot of my mother's stuff is just, we've moved house, she became ill, and it's in a terrible muddle. So if it sounds as though, and some of it it's been written over many years, and some of it sounds as though it's, I'm reading the same thing again. Anyway, this appears to be chapter 2 from somewhere, but what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to say about the creation of our race, how we started off, our planet, how things work. And I say gradually, if you stick with me, you'll find there is some sense to it all. So right, here we go. Concerning creation. Religions teach everyone that God created the world, and basically they try to instill into their people a sense of order and goodness, concern for others. In fact, all of those things that are most admired and sought after by those desirous of living in a world which is well ordered and a joy to live in. One thing must be remembered about many of those things that all of the various religious leaders taught their people was that they were sent into a totally primitive world where such things as computers, electricity, mechanical engines were not known at all, and anything that was not easily understandable would have been regarded with the deepest suspicion, fear, and perhaps the terror that it was the work of some evil monster or the devil himself. This message would have been impossible to give even 100 years ago, when computers were not known and people were not as open-minded as they are today. Actually, I don't know, we're getting so politically correct, and ready to look at any explanation of the unknown, at least with interest, even if not with belief. Firstly, as there are always many people who believe that God created the world, what can one say about this unknown creator or entity? Who on earth is he? We who live on the other side have never seen any such being, neither an angel nor any other being that those similar to ourselves, who are as, nor any other being than those similar to ourselves, who are, as those of you who will be reading this book, human, both men and women. Consider, therefore, some great creature of enormous size, capable of creating the universe within which the planets revolve on their automated courses. Who created him in the first place? There is no end to the speculation and no answer to a deeply intelligent thinking person. Something of greatest knowledge, understanding, and power created the universe and everything that lives within it, and it must be immense. And in this book we must give the warning that it not only creates, but can just as easily destroy anything or anyone that interferes with the basic master plan, because every single living thing is part of that master plan, which is all geared to the creation. The first thing that everyone has to understand about all living things that belong within the master plan of creation is that everything, and we do mean everything, exists on two structures. And in fact, possibly more than this in some cases, but we simple human beings can only hope to comprehend a simplistic description, or the whole complexity of creation may become confusing. For people of 100 or more years ago, this message would have been impossible to convey, as they would never have known what a computer was, or electricity, or a flying craft, or even a horseless carriage. Endlessly clever scientists discuss the universe. How was it created in the very first place? The Big Bang Theory. One thing must be remembered in any understanding of the living world, and that every single thing is based on similar, and although they often seem completely impossible to comprehend, absolutely similar principles. It has been truly stated that if every single living person from the dawn of time goes to paradise, then it must be extremely crowded. This is, of course, absolutely true, and everything that we are trying to explain is completely logical when it is considered carefully. A child is born, of whatever race, after and only after a male sperm or organism contained only in the body of a man or father of the child unites with the female ovum contained only in the body of a woman, who becomes the mother of the infant. This child grows to adulthood in the normal course of its life, and when its life is over, may or may not pass on, and could become, as we are here, and be recruited to help to run the planet. We are therefore not born from men and women as the living are, but must have lived at some time in either your world or some other. One thing must be understood. Only in the living world can life be created, and all creatures, both human or otherwise, no matter how insignificant they might be, have two bodies: the living body that can be seen, felt and touched, and the invisible one which can live on after the old physical body is destroyed on another structure, which is in fact an integral part of the living planet. So it is that we, the non-living, can see, hear and know the living, speak into their minds, run and monitor their lives for the hoped-for good of others living. So bearing in mind that all things are created in a similar way, the planet can only be created in the fusing together of its basic elements in some violent way, and therefore the Big Bang theory of the creation of the universe and the creation of the planets themselves must in some way resemble the creation of man himself. And just as he has a second or electrical body, not spiritual, which conjures up the idea of something ethereal, gaseous, without substance, which on our structure is not so, both bodies are just as physical within their own structure, as no creature can live without a body which has no substance, any more than they could live on a cloud, which so many people imagine must be life after death. The planet therefore also has as an integral part of its second body or substance on which the non-living reside, for whatever period it is that they must remain there. Now we go on to do this one. The creation of mankind himself. How, children ask, are we born? Where do we come from? Gooseberry bushes, other wild ideas told to fretful children should now all completely disappear, just like the promise of paradise after death, or gone to Jesus, which unfortunately bears no possible sort of link with reality whatsoever. The Christian Bible is regarded as perhaps one of the most important messages ever given to the world, as is the Quran and other Hindu and Buddhist scriptures, which purport to speak of man rising up after death to marvellous places of pleasure and paradise, completely impossible in physical life. In another chapter, we deal at length with the Christian religion and Jesus himself, well known to those of us who dictate this book. In the beginning, a man, for man he was and is, dressed in an elegant, seemingly blue 17th century costume, appeared to the writer, and this has a very important meaning. It means that this is not in any way a religious message, but simply knowledge, a knowledge which must clear away forever the foolish superstitions of the 17th century. Everything which is in the world is based upon knowledge and beliefs of the 17th century, surviving until the present day, and completely illogical and false. In the beginning was God. It says in the Holy Bible, to this day, people have an impossible vision or idea of some impossibly large being clad in shining armour to whom all prayers can be directed and hopefully answered, comforting perhaps, but untrue and false. No one, absolutely no one, can possibly come to understand what or how this fantastic universe and the people in it were conceived of in the very first place, or whether there are other universes even more fantastic in size and concept, to which we shall all go when we have reached the ultimate of our development. And this perhaps must be the nearest thing to ultimate paradise, if there is such a thing that can be possibly imagined. No one being could possibly run, rule, or create this vast universe, or even this one small planet. No one. In the beginning, then, what is there? A lonely God, busily turning out his little people because he was lonely and needed someone to watch over. This is the basic idea of many people and most religious people. In the beginning is a fantastic mass of fire, of power, which in the ultimate produces rocks and a whole revolving automated scheme of things, so marvellous and so complicated that it defies description. And absolutely everything works, or more or less on the same principle, even human beings themselves, who take many millions of years to create. Firstly, then, one has a planet ready for habitation. The fires and earthquakes have died down, the sun warms it, and gentle breezes blow over its waters, now ready and already beginning to teem with this mysterious thing, life. All life begins with water, and nothing is created on this structure without this precious fluid, which is made up of those two basic parts of creation, oxygen and hydrogen, as all schoolboys know, H2O, oxygen in one part and hydrogen in two parts, the basis of creation. All school children listen with bored lassitude to descriptions of the first type of little creature, the amoeba, and this is the beginning of the very beginning of all life. This little creature, which in itself is who is amazing, who can divide and subdivide and grow as it rolls around the fluids that surround it and gobbles up algae, which again is the beginning of plant life. Green slime. Until water and green algae of all sorts and types can develop, then no life can survive on any planet. If nothing is done, it takes millions upon millions of years for a planet to slowly evolve simple fish-type creatures, which as time goes on become fish, slimy worms, eels, lizards, frogs. It is lizards and frogs that slowly climb out of the slime and in millions upon millions of years slowly become other creatures. There are also various types of insect that develop in all manner of miraculous ways, but in every case they must begin with water, like the dragonfly that spends the first part of its life in water before climbing up a plant stem, shedding its outer shell, and becomes the beautiful creature with wings that flies about in sunlight. In the beginning, it was said to the writer by our 17th century representative that everything is like a network. Work must go on without cessation, and this is true. Part of that work is to traverse the universe and to find out planets that are becoming ready for habitation, when true hard work must begin. Firstly, it must be remembered that this universe and everything within it exists on two structures at once, the physical, creative, living structure and the non-living, non-creative structure. After death, all intelligent humanity, if it does not immediately live again, exists upon the structure that we live on. Then after death, the after-death non-living structure, which looks much the same, does not age in the same way, does not eat, does not therefore excrete, therefore does not either recreate itself or give birth. Only upon the living physical plane does mating, birth, and the whole creation of life take place. Every planet is two planets, whether it is inhabited or uninhabited, or uninhabitable, and the other structure is where the rest planes or life after death places exist, all around the living in such a way as to be quite invisible to the living, but if we so desire it, not invisible to us. We, the non-living, do not watch the living unless it is our wish or our task to do so, when we may, if we so desire, slip into the living world whenever we wish, and do those tasks that must be done to keep the living going, and firstly to promote life in emerging planets. What, the intelligent man may ask, happens then in the very beginning, when there simply are no living persons anywhere to visit an emergent planet? What then? It simply takes millions and millions of years longer. In the very beginning, there simply are only basic insects and a few very small animals. Trees grow, plants grow, as the insects grow, as without basic insects the trees and flowers and plants cannot grow either. When this stage has been reached, hopefully someone on our structure hears of this new emergent planet and thereafter comes to its rescue. There are in this universe all too few planets that are inhabitable, and possibly millions that have not yet been found. A planet such as yours is very precious indeed. Given greater knowledge and help, it could become a marvellous place for everyone to live in. This is our hope for your planet. All creatures slowly grow from one life to the next, but only certain ones ever become humanity. These are the stinging insects of all types and kinds who must stalk their prey and find ways to lay in wait, killing them instantly, and in this way developing a simple, basic intellect. Perhaps this is the saddest thing about creation as far as man is concerned. It is based entirely upon violence, without which mankind, as an intelligent, thinking, calculating being, simply could not exist at all. This is the truth about humanity. All little basic creatures, fish, insects, birds, exist like man upon two structures at once. That is to say that in the creation of life, two bodies, one inside the other, are formed, which is not the entity or soul. That is something indestructible, whereas the two bodies based upon electricity, like everything else that is living, are destructible. And I'll go on to talk about that later with abortion. So we have within us two bodies, our electrical body, which basically runs everything, and our physical body. And when we finish here, we will have our entity, which lives within us, will have gained strength from our life, and that will go on to the other side to become our body, on our other side body. All simple creatures live, eat each other in such a way that the creature, when it dies, hardly knows what has happened to it, and is born again in yet another egg cell of some sort to take its place in the scheme and order of things. All creatures must not only die when their span is over, but their bodies must be so created that they are disposed of cleanly and forever, leaving no waste and no mess. This is the only way that the physical world can remain as unpolluted as possible, at least in the very beginning, before mankind rises up to pollute it in all manner of different ways. Eventually you get to the small four-footed creature, which has in many millions of years mutated from some simple insect or frog. The frog is most often the beginning of a long chain of various types of humanity, having 4 legs, 2 eyes, and a mouth, placed vaguely in the same sequence as humanity. Only the best survives to go forward to be a better life. Only the most intelligent of millions ever becomes yet another slightly more intelligent creature, until you get to the ape or monkey in all his different forms, and it is the ape or monkey who is the very beginning of man himself. The knowledge we are giving is simple and basic. There is simply no point in trying to explain to ordinary people the complicated mechanics or creation, some of which are so mysterious as to be unknown and unfathomable in any case. If a planet is not found, then it cannot mutate beyond a certain point. The most important and boring work that must be done is this searching for an emergent planet for future colonization. It can take several hundred years of travelling around the heavens by living people on our structure to find a living planet ready for the important work that must go on century after century to bring any planet to life. Everything works on a computerized basis, and all entities or souls must pass through an extremely complicated computer in such a way that their future life or lives are decided. Vast, complicated laboratories have to be set up, and someone with great knowledge has to run them. These people must be those on our structure, who may live for any period up to 2,000 or 3,000 years, given help and continual boosts of life force, which is the same both for physical living and those of us who live on the other structure, or non-physical life. The whole basis of life is reincarnation. Without that, no life would be possible. The whole basis of life for humanity is constant change. Humanity and even animals quickly become bored if there's not constant stimulus, which makes the ancient concept of heaven absolutely absurd. No one could possibly sit around in ultimate light strumming some sort of musical instrument indefinitely and remain happy. It simply is not a feasible proposition at all. Intelligent humanity needs to work, and the more advanced he becomes, the more complicated work that he is able to perform. Tissue which creates life is now being frozen and implanted into some host mothers with some success, and people take this fact for granted. This is the basic way that in the very beginning intelligent people must be brought to life to help to create a living planet. It is possible to take tissue from a living person, a sperm from a man, or very many or several ovum from a woman, who will be required to live again either in her home planet or transferred to another, possibly millions of miles away on the other side of this universe. In the very beginning, simple ape man must be created, and this means sperm from black, brown, or even white and yellow people from other parts of the universe, where the humanity is exactly the same as yours. All people must begin in one or other of the coloured races, whose sole function in life is to tend their animals, roam over the wide plains of the earth. All mankind of whatever race exists in the clan system and becomes extremely unhappy left alone. Humanity belongs in families, and this is the most important piece of knowledge that human beings of all sorts must come to understand and remember. Once the family clan system breaks down, then humanity turns to all sorts of dreadful self-destructive pursuits and becomes dreadfully unhappy. Simple tribes of people are the very beginning for all humanity. All people pass through some sort of animal, or many. There are the lynx type of people or cat people that are mainly to be found in those of the Chinese or Oriental races. How easy it is to see that their features do resemble a cat type of face. There are also monkeys of one sort or another who have had this slanted-eyed type of feature and are very agile and belong in the feline group of creature. There are those who have passed through the dog, the lion and the monkey. That has the dog type of feature, the dog monkey. There are horse people, and always, even when they have reached the ultimate of intelligence, they will always feel a great affinity with horses, and the horse with them. There are within the human races of this planet, and all others, all different types of people, and these relate to the animals from which they have sprung many millions of years before. In the very ultimate, there must be most intelligent of white man set to rule, and hopefully when complete development is reached, to keep the peace between all nations and to try to create a beautiful world for all races. All too rarely, for a large variety of reasons, this is never ever achieved, and humanity destroys itself. All life is based on violence, and all too often mankind in his ignorance turns to war to subdue a troublesome neighbour, not only to steal his wealth and promote his own, not only because unfortunately mankind all too often, having been created through violence, enjoys it, and seems to need to alleviate the boredom, but because with the rising population, economies of countries become so complicated that no one knows exactly what to do to stop absolute chaos. Only certain people of all races ever become intelligent enough to rule, and they are all too few and very precious. Much sought after throughout the universe. All people of all races must live many humble, simple lives, doing menial, simple tasks, before they have acquired the basis for something better and more advanced. Not everyone can do that. Many never progress very far, and are happiest tending either their farm animals or growing simple crops within the bosom of their intimate families. This is the simple happiness for ordinary people who make up the basis of all races. Some sorts of races really should never be expected to work very much. Simple village life is all that they are suited to do. Fishing if they live near the sea. They live and they die, bring up their children in a communal way, and are most often reincarnated back into their family clans, where they can be happy for hundreds of years, unless they are chosen to move on, change colour, and start on an entirely new, slow climb of growth and intellect. The tragedy of mankind in this planet is that no message of any importance whatsoever has ever been given to it. The taking of slaves, which was brought about by man's wickedness and greed, has gone on for thousands of years, long before Christ came and gave his message, or any of the major prophets for this world. Simple people who ought to have been left alone were too ignorant and unwary to realize that without some sort of protection they were simply terribly vulnerable and would be seized. Whole families, wives, husbands, children, everyone, throughout the Mediterranean areas of this world, black men in coastal regions of Africa, beaten unmercifully and taken away to a strange land to work until they dropped for a cruel master who did not care that they had lost the only thing that humanity exists for, his family. This has meant one of many ways that races have become mixed up, in some places so hopelessly that the original people who must have lived there long ago have disappeared altogether. Race in all its various types and colours does not exist simply as some haphazard scheme of nature. It is all part of the basic plan of humanity. Everybody must pass through some sort of type of coloured race before he becomes in the end a white man. If in ignorance all the races become completely mixed up, well, I've lost the last page, then it means that they have bodies that don't last and become very ill, and then but once our population becomes so ugly and so ill, then they just literally destroy us, which is a terrible thing. That's the end of that, and I don't know what's happened to that page, which is annoying. Right. Then I could go into how the soul is placed in the unborn child.